Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the book of Esther. This week we're in chapter 3, and I just wanted to give a little bit of background and overview of this chapter because there's a lot going on and leading up into chapter 4, which we'll talk about next week. So, as we mentioned earlier in our earlier sessions, that in the book of Esther, it does not mention God's name anywhere, but we see God's overruling providence throughout the entire book. And we see that God sets his people in places and sometimes years in advance. And like most of us, when God is working things out, we tend to complain. But God is so graceful and merciful, and he blesses us, and he has such a compassionate heart, and he loves us dearly. As we see as we get to chapter 3, we come up to this man, Haman. And Haman would be considered the Hitler of the Old Testament. He wanted to set a day for the extermination of the Jews. And we see as we read in verses 1 through 7 that there was a lot that fell on the 12th month, which would be the month of March, because they started with the month of their year started with the month of April. Haman was an Agagite. Agagite is a term for the Amalekites' king Agag, descendants of the Amalek, the grandson of Esau, who sold his birthright to his brother Jacob in Exodus 25:29. God had ordered Saul to completely destroy the Amalekites, but he left the king Agag alive. For this sin, he deposed in God's eyes from being the king over Israel because of his disobedience, not utterly destroying the Amalek, saving Agag's life. God ordered him to completely destroy Amalek and not leave anything or anyone standing. Destroy everything, God said. Saul disobeyed, saving the life of Agag. No doubt others in the king's family as well. And you might ask yourself, why would such a loving God do such a horrible thing? Command Saul to utterly destroy them. Looking at the picture in Samuel 1, 1 Samuel chapter 15, it seems like maybe God is very cruel in his demand. Yet because God can look down the road and see what lies in the future, he realized that if he didn't destroy them all, there would arise one day one of the descendants that would seek to destroy all of God's people. Had Saul been obedient to God, Haman would never have existed, and his edict against God's people would never have been. God could see that far in advance. The Amalekites were always a type of our flesh, the flesh life, living after the flesh. God has ordered that our flesh be put to death in Romans chapter 6, verse 6, and chapter 8, verse 13. Paul says, I know in me, my flesh, there dwells no good thing. Romans 7:18. God has ordered that our flesh be put to death, our self, our ambitions, our own ambitions, anything and everything that hinders us on the altar of our sacrifice. If you, as Saul, and I, as Saul, fail to obey the command of God and continue to make provisions for our flesh, we'll continue to live after the flesh and allow sin in. Well, it's just a little sin, and that's not indulging my flesh, you might say. You can be sure that your incomplete disobedience in God's command of the destruction of the flesh will come back someday to destroy you and to destroy your spiritual walk in life. We are to make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its desires, its lust. We are to walk after the Spirit. We are to live after the Spirit, making no provision for the flesh. Saul's disobedience in allowing the flesh to still remain is coming back to haunt his descendants years later, as Haman the Agagite was placed in the position of prominence and the command given that whenever he walks by, everybody should bow and and give him obedience. But Mordecai, we will see in the story, refused. Haman was planning to kill the Jews and rob them of all their goods, offering a bribe for millions of dollars. He was just going to rip them of all their goods after he killed them. So, ladies and those listening, let's not give in to sin. Let's completely destroy the flesh and live fully after the Spirit, full in for God, making no exceptions. May you be blessed and continue to be blessed as you read chapter 3 of the book of Esther. Goodbye until next time.